Top of the morning to you. St. Patrick's Day is probably one of my favorite holidays. I've skipped over preaching around the Super Bowl and St. Valentine's Day, but I cannot miss St. Patrick's Day. And there's all kinds of reasons, and this mic probably isn't on here. Maybe I've hit it a few times, so listen to me. See? Blunt force always works. Anyway, there's probably a few different reasons that St. Patrick's Day has always been my favorite. One is that I was very nearly born on St. Patrick's Day. Apparently my mom even went into labor on St. Patrick's Day, but I lasted through it and held on as long as I could. So the 18th is actually my birthday, not the 17th, but it's close. The other in my theory is that as I grew older, I did not grow up, so it's easy for me to identify with leprechauns. I think that has to be part of it. But nonetheless, I'll go ahead and take this off now. That's far enough. Well, actually, yeah, I can give a little bit more, because I'm going to give a little quick history on St. Patrick. Probably the best reason is that as I've gotten older, I've gained more appreciation for him in a totally different way. That what St. Patrick did was truly astounding, and it had nothing to do with snakes, but it did have to do with shamrocks. He was taken out of his homeland and put into Ireland, and then went back to Great Britain, and then by choice went back into Ireland. But ultimately what he did in the process of doing these things was that he fought paganism. Paganism was rampant. The Druids were the religions, were in charge of the religion at the time. And he came in and showed them a whole new way to live. And he was a great educator. The shamrock was his way of teaching about the Trinity. He would hold up the shamrock and say, is it one leaf or three? And they would say, well, it's 3 leaves in one. And he said, so it is with God. God is 3 persons in one God. And it's just such a simple, astounding way. So I gained a huge appreciation for St. Patrick as a teacher, and just in the things that he did. In his confession, and this is going to be up so you can try to follow along as I'm reading this, he says, I am Patrick, yes, a sinner and indeed untaught, yet I am established here in Ireland where I profess myself bishop. I am certain in my heart that all that I am, I have received from God. So I live among barbarous tribes, a stranger and exile for the love of God. I speak too for love of my neighbors, who are my only sons. For them I gave up my home country, my parents, and even pushing my own life to the brink of death. If I have any worth, it is to live my life for God, so as to teach these peoples. So he devoted himself to bringing these people to Christ, to teaching them new ways to live, to teaching them all about Jesus. And as such, he was a great teacher. And this jacket is hot and this hat is inappropriate. That's enough about that. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about Jesus as the teacher. And that's the best segue that I have into this. We'll come back to what St. Patrick gave up to be a teacher, but for the meantime, as a teacher, that's most of what he did, and Jesus was his example as a teacher. So we're going to play another game with quotes. And yes, we will play the game. I was debating with Sarah whether I should or not. So I'm going to give you some quotes, and you're going to tell me who these people are. And it's all about Jesus as a teacher. Because last week what we talked about had to do with Jesus being respected and honored and loved as a teacher. That when he went back into his hometown, they were excited to hear him come back and to teach again. And it was widespread. There were people who respected him as a teacher everywhere. And it's gone on since he's died and come back to life, and gone on, and the world has kept turning other people have respected him as a teacher. So this is one. What then does Jesus mean to me? To me, he was one of the greatest teachers humanity has ever had. In Jesus' own life is the key of his nearness to God, that he expressed as no other could the spirit and will of God. The lives of all, in some greater or lesser degree, have been changed by his presence, his actions, and the words spoken by his divine voice. Any guesses? Who was it? No. Yes, it was Gandhi. Man, it's not supposed to get it. It was Gandhi.
History major.
You've used your only life right there. Anyway, but yes, it was Gandhi. Gandhi was a great Hindu leader. He was somebody that a lot of people look to and respect for a lot of things. But he was Hindu. Make no doubt about it. He was not a believer in Christ in that he accepted him as his Savior. And that's where this article, that's where these quotes come from even, is an article where he's saying, I don't have to accept Jesus as my Savior to accept him as my teacher. And he had a lot of respect for Jesus, but he only brought it to that one point. Jesus was a great teacher in Gandhi's mind. So even a Hindu respects Jesus as a teacher. Next quote. In my readings of the New Testament, I find myself inspired by Jesus' acts of compassion. His miracle of the loaves and fishes, his healing, and his teaching are all motivated by the desire to relieve suffering.
Teresa.
Nice. See, that's what I thought too, actually. Anybody else? No? Okay. Dad. You want to spoil it?
You don't want me to say.
Do you know
what I was going to say?
What were you going to say?
Pretty sure it's not Obama.
No, it's the Dalai Lama, the head of the Buddhist, well, of the Tibetan Buddhism, another world-renowned, well-respected leader. But again, make no mistake, he is not a Christian. He is a Buddhist, and he will not take Jesus as his Savior, but he will respect him as a teacher. Next quote. At least in the teachings that are attributed to him, he publicly advocated niceness. I know, I love that one. And was one of the first to do so. A charismatic young preacher who advocated generous forgiveness must have seemed radical to the point of subversion. And he went on to say, no wonder they nailed him to the cross. Which is astounding that he would accept that as well. Any guesses? Most of you probably don't know who this person is. His name is Richard Dawkins. If you do know who he is, then you understand how big a deal that is. Richard Dawkins is a biologist who is a flaming atheist. And there's no way to say how much of an atheist he is. He wrote a book called The God Delusion. He is currently touring a movie and screening a movie called Unbelievers. And his goal in life, it seems, is to rid the world of faith and religion. And yet he respects Jesus as a teacher. One more, and this is because you may know who this person is better. You may have actually heard of this person. Jesus as a philosopher is wonderful. There's no greater role model in my view than Jesus Christ. Who? No. First name is right. Bill.
Clinton.
No. It was on the Bill O'Reilly show that this quote happened. So you're getting closer. Bill Maher. who is also a flaming atheist,
Yeah.
and seems to be trying to rid the world of all religion. He does movies called Religulous and interviews where he makes fun of people who have faith in anything, especially Jesus. And yet in this interview with Bill O'Reilly, he came out with this quote: "Jesus as a philosopher is wonderful. There's no greater role model in my view than Jesus Christ." Astounding. All of these people, Buddhists, Hindus, atheists, all kinds of people, will accept Jesus as a teacher. They'll accept that he's a good teacher, but they won't take that next step. And Bill Maher's quote goes on to say, "It's just a shame that most of the people who follow him and call themselves Christians act nothing like him. Most Christians don't act Christ-like. If they would call themselves Christ-likes instead of Christians, maybe it would remind them to act like Jesus." And he's got a point. But I've already preached on that. So this week we're talking about Jesus as a teacher. And that's outside views on Jesus as a teacher. And what we're going to do is we're going to go from the outside all the way in. And we're going to understand a little bit more of Jesus as a teacher. So Jesus as a teacher had many different styles. The first style is that he was a lecturer. Matthew chapter 5 and all the way through chapter 7, he spends his time going through the Sermon on the Mount. And this was one of the ways, one of the styles in which he taught. Excuse me. So in Matthew chapter 5, he starts the whole thing off with this is starting in verse 3. Well, no, I'm starting in verse 1. "One day as he saw crowds gathering, Jesus went up on the mountainside and sat down. His disciples gathered around him and he began to teach them." And he goes on and he gives this sermon, he gives this lecture, as we think of. This is more of a schoolroom setting, I guess, kind of a thing. In today's culture it would be. But it's not simply a teaching. It's profound and it's revolutionary. God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him. I'm reading out of the New Living Translation. Sorry, Grandma. "For the kingdom of heaven is theirs. God blesses those who mourn, for they will be comforted. God blesses those who are humble, for they will inherit the whole earth. God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will be satisfied. God blesses those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy. God blesses those whose hearts are pure, for they will see God. God blesses those who work for peace, for they will be called the children of God. God blesses those who are persecuted for doing right, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. God blesses you when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you and say all sorts of evil things against you because you are my followers. Be happy about it. Be glad about it, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way." Wonderful teaching. And yet it's contrary to what we think. He says those who are on the bottom are going to be on the top. Those who are meek are going to be strong and powerful. He turns everything upside down. As a teacher, it just blows our minds that this is what he's talking about. Because this teaching has nothing to do with our experience out there in the real world. This is not how the world works. And yet Jesus is saying, in my kingdom, this is how the world works. You have to start looking at it differently. As a lecturer, this is profound. It's revolutionary. He goes on to say things like, in verse 21, "You have heard that our ancestors were told you must not murder. If you commit murder, you are subject to judgment." Well, yeah, that's absolutely what the teaching is. But I say, if you are even angry with someone, if you are subject sorry. If you are even angry with someone, you are subject to judgment. If you call someone an idiot, you are in danger of being brought before the court. And if you curse someone, you are in danger of the fires of hell. Whoa! I've called people idiots? This is bad! He takes it that step further. He says, it's not simply about the legalism of things. You've got to love. You've got to follow this to the extent of it. Don't simply not kill somebody. Everybody can not kill somebody. That's easy. Don't hate somebody. Let your anger go. Down in verse 27, you have heard the commandment that says, you must not commit adultery. But I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Ouch. That's a big message in today's culture, especially. This stuff is everywhere. Again, he looks at this commandment, he looks at this law, and he says, I'm going to teach it. It's absolutely what the law says, but it's more than that. It's not simply, don't do this. It's something much more and much deeper. Jesus as a teacher, as a lecturer, is profound and revolutionary, and he will blow your mind. He will change the way you see everything. But he was more than that. He made it a little bit easier. It wasn't just about sitting down and having to listen to somebody talk, like Sunday mornings. It was also about storytelling. Maybe he dressed up a little bit sometimes. I don't know. But he made it so that it was accessible for us. A couple pages later in Matthew 7, verse 24. This actually showed up on a list of parables in one of my resources. I don't know that I would call it a parable, but it's a good in-between example. Anyone who listens to my teaching, this is in verse 24, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents and floodwaters rise and the winds beat against the house, it will not collapse because it is built on bedrock. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. When the rains and floods come and winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. What a great visual example. It's not just about do this, don't do that, listen to this. It's a story. It's an example. It's something that we can see and feel and hear and touch. It makes sense. You're not going to build your house on the beach. It's going to wash away. You're going to build a foundation, and then you're going to build your house on top of that. He says, so it is with my teaching. He tells stories like the Good Samaritan. He tells the story of people of an individual who has been beaten and left for dead, and who needs somebody to love and to help him. And it's one big example of loving somebody, even if they're a stranger, even if they're somebody who you technically maybe kind of shouldn't be loving. He tells stories like the prodigal son, but again, is all about love. All about that son who takes everything away from his father and runs off and rebels against everything that he's ever known, only to lose it all and to come back. These are all stories that we understand. We can see somebody. We know of somebody who's done this in our lives. Jesus as a storyteller is just astounding. And it wasn't simply the way that he taught. It's also in who followed him. Jesus had crowds following him. He fed 5,000 one time. Another time he fed 4,000 people. Other than that, it said multitudes followed him, crowds followed him. He couldn't even list how many people were following him. And these numbers didn't even include the women and children that were with him. All the counts were all about the men that followed him. He had everybody following him. And like I said, from the outside going in, he had these crowds following him, but inside those crowds were disciples. And the disciples weren't even what we always think of as disciples. In Luke 10, we see that he sends out 72 of them. 72 that were on the inner circle, that were disciples, that called themselves disciples. Inside that 72, then you've got 12. 12 people that were absolutely the inner circle. These guys followed Jesus everywhere he went. They got to see and touch and feel Jesus and eat with him. They were there at the Last Supper with him. And then inside that were 3 individuals, Peter, James, and John, who absolutely followed him everywhere. After the Last Supper, Jesus goes on to Gethsemane, and he takes the 3 a little further with him. When he went and the transfiguration happened with Jesus, those were the 3 that were there with him on top of that mountain, experiencing this with him. So Jesus wasn't just a lecturer. He wasn't just this storyteller weaving narratives around. He didn't just have huge crowds follow him. He did all of those things. But he also brought it down and wound up telling people one-on-one. He was a one-on-one teacher. Jesus as a teacher is just masterful. It's astounding to read the Gospels and be taught by Jesus. He is profound, he is revolutionary. Even his enemies could not dispute his teachings. They kept trying to trip him up. They called him rabbi when they did it, and they tried to get him to make a mistake, but they couldn't trip him up. Even when they did, they had to call it blasphemy. And they were the ones that were wrong about that. Even non-believers, Buddhists, Hindus, atheists, people all over the world have respect for Jesus as a teacher. So the question is Jesus your teacher? And I always leave these statements, Jesus is my teacher, I am dumb no more. Last week it was captive no more, this week it is dumb no more. Because the intellect, the understanding, the rationale that he uses is just astounding. And you will come away smarter for having known Jesus. But it doesn't simply stop there, does it? It's not about that. Because if we left it there, we would stay right there with those Buddhists and Hindus. And this isn't the end. This isn't as simple as Jesus is as a teacher. It's not all about that head knowledge. Because Jesus as a teacher, ultimately, it was all about his disciples. Because to be a disciple meant that you were following. Meant that you were there with him. See, rabbis at that time would have a school of disciples that followed them everywhere. And these were kids that had grown up and had stayed in school their entire lives. They had the choice to stay in school and learn more and more and more and go deeper and deeper and deeper. It would be our understanding of the higher education. Or they could hit this point after basically elementary school where they would go on and be apprentices. And the apprentices would go on and they would be, I don't know, fishermen, maybe tax collectors, maybe something like that. And that meant that they hit this wall that they couldn't learn anymore. No rabbi would take them in. And Jesus, as a rabbi, when he was looking for his school, he went and he found those guys who had been rejected by other rabbis. He said, they may have said that you're not good enough, that you're not smart enough, that you don't have the intellect. But I see something more than intellect in you. So for a fisherman, he went and he called them and he said, come and fish for men with me. For a tax collector, This guy is a no-no. You don't associate yourself with tax collectors. They're sinners. They're bad dudes. They rob people. They're worse than Wall Street, for Pete's sake. And he said, come and follow me. And that's where everything starts with Jesus. Everything starts with come and follow. He personally called one by one by one. Come and follow. And he's still doing it today. Come and follow. Each and every one of you have that same calling. And to do this was not an easy thing. There were those that couldn't follow him. He invited and they said, no, I need to do this. I need to do this. And he said, then you're not ready to follow. Let the dead bury their own dead, he says. You come and follow. Leave everything you know. There was a cost to this discipleship. In Luke chapter 14, verse 25, again, a large crowd. A large crowd was following Jesus. He turned around and said, if you want to be my disciple, you must hate everyone else by comparison. Wait, what happened to all that love talk, Jesus? By comparison, you must hate everyone else. Your father and your mother, your wife and your children, brothers and sisters, yes, even your own life. Otherwise, you cannot be my disciple. And if you do not carry your own cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. I'm going to pause there. I'm going to finish it out, but I'm going to pause there. Because when we first moved here, we were attending First Alliance Church. Steve Elliott, I think, is the pastor there. And Elliott. He said something that has haunted me from that day on. And what he said was, no one has ever taken up a cross who was not on his way to die. No one has ever taken up a cross who was not on his way to die. Because in this time, that's what a cross was. Nobody ever imagined up to this point that Jesus was going to pick up a cross, for Pete's sake. This was an execution. This was a prisoner. This was a bad, bad person who was taking up their cross. And he says, you will commit to this extent. It will hurt and it will cost, but you will be my disciple and you will follow me. Verse 28, but don't begin until you count the cost. For who would begin construction of a building? Again, he goes with these examples. Without first calculating the cost to see if there's enough money to finish it. Otherwise, you might complete only the foundation before running out of money. And then everyone would laugh at you. Then they would say, there's that person who started that building and couldn't afford to finish. Jesus says there is a cost. And before you follow me, you need to be sure that you're ready to pay that cost. You need to be sure that you're willing to pick up your cross. You need to be sure that you're ready to leave your father and mother and sister and brother and wife and children all behind if that's what it comes to. Because following me is more important than everything else. Everything else. It's not simply come and follow, we're going to have a great time. It's come and follow, there is a cost. Now, dumb, I've already given it away. Dumb no more is more or less the title of the sermon. And dumb has two different meanings. Dumb, it can be just how stupid I am, because it takes a lot of work. But dumb can also mean the inability to speak. And that's what I thought of when I thought of this, when I thought of Jesus as a teacher, is that while Jesus is teaching, while I'm reading these Gospels, I need to shut my mouth and I need to listen. And I need to be dumb until he said that I'm ready to not be dumb anymore. Because there's this time that happens when the apostles... No, I'm not going to read that, I'm sorry. When the disciples became apostles. See, as a disciple, you're a learner and you're a student and you're coming and you're following and you're doing whatever Jesus tells you to do. But then they became apostles. And an apostle is like a diplomat. There we go. I like to think it was dignitary. An apostle was like a diplomat. He was somebody who would go and he would teach. And suddenly the student becomes the teacher. Such a cliche phrase. And yet it's so very true in this case. Peter was that disciple who was always stumbling over himself and trying to figure out how to learn the right way. And then this thing happened where he became the apostle. And he was the teacher. And he went on. And Jesus will open up our mouths. And he tells us that it's time to go and to teach. That you will be dumb no more. You can't sit there and just keep your mouth shut and listen. You have to hit a point where you go out and start teaching what you've learned. Matthew chapter 10, starting at verse 24. Students are not greater than their master, and slaves are not greater than their master. Students are to be like their teacher, and slaves are to be like their master. And since I, the master of the household, have been called the prince of demons, the members of my household will be called by even worse names. But don't be afraid of those who threaten you, for the time is coming when everything that is covered will be revealed, and all that is secret will be made known to all. What I tell you now in the darkness, shout abroad when daybreak comes. What I whisper in your ear, shout from the housetops for all to hear. Jesus says, you are going to be my student, and you are coming, and you are following, and I'm teaching you. And these are all good and wonderful things. And you need to spend that time there. But this time is coming where you will no longer be the student. You will no longer be the disciple. You will be the apostle. You will go and you will represent me out in the world, and you will teach, and you will not be quiet about it. You will not keep your mouth shut. You will open it, and you will shout, and you will scream from the rooftops, because I am Lord, says Jesus. And what better thing can you have to shout about than that? Forget your favorite sports teams. They'll lose. Jesus always wins. And just to drive that point home, he finishes his time with the disciples in Matthew at the end of Matthew chapter 28, verse 18. Jesus came and told his disciples, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands that I have given you. And be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Go and teach. So we spend all this time understanding Jesus as a teacher. We spend all this time learning from him and gaining this knowledge from him. And that will never stop. We will always be trying to understand everything about what Jesus was telling us. But he says, go and teach. This is what I leave you with. He chucks the keys into our hands, gives us the authority to the kingdom. And he tells us it's all about teaching. It's all about continuing that. Like Mike talked about with having a baby of your own, having a child that is yours. You must raise them and you must teach them. So it is here in this world, in this church. must continue to teach these things that Jesus has taught us. And we're left with that question today. Will we take on Jesus as our teacher? Will you take Jesus as your teacher? Will you come and follow? Will you count that cost? I want to encourage you, especially during this time of Lent, leading up to Easter, to spend time. And by that I mean spend time. Go slowly through the Gospels, through Jesus' teachings. Let them wash over you. Let them pour over you. They are astounding. They will blow your mind. And take them on for yourself. Will you then open your mouth and teach others as Jesus taught you? For me, Jesus is my teacher, and I am dumb no more. And I hope the same can be said of you. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you. Thank you for all of what you are, all of who you are, all of what you have done in our lives. Thank you for teaching us. Thank you for the intellect of it. Thank you for the common sense of it. Thank you for showing us how to do what is right, how to love those around us. May we never stop learning from you. And Lord, give us that spirit, that power. Help us to be ready to use your teachings, to go out into this world, and to continue them over and over again. Open up our mouths. Do not let